The following video contains adult subject matter including, but not limited to, murder, death, psychosis, abuse, child death, infanticide, self-harm, suicide, alcoholism and addiction, torture, body horror, mutilation, trauma, and voice acting. For those of you who maybe found my other videos on games like Before Your Eyes or To the Moon, games that I think are rather uplifting, to be a bit depressing, this video is probably not going to be for you, because this game is actually quite depressing. Also, major spoilers for the entire story. Now, let's get into it.
Like that. Let's leave. Have to climb out.
The 1998 psychological horror point-and-click adventure game Sanitarium is without a doubt one of the strangest games I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Though the gameplay itself is very simple, albeit with some rather archaic controls even for the time, the narrative structure is one we rarely see employed in video games, and the adventure takes us from one nightmarish and abstract dreamscape to the next, as Max, our main character, tries to uncover the truth of reality and his own identity, which he seems to have lost somewhere along the way. Though the fiction is definitely stranger than the reality in Sanitarium, the worlds Max finds himself in as he tries to discover his reality do an amazing job hinting the truth at the player and hiding bits and pieces of the puzzle everywhere in plain sight. When all is said and done, the actual story is a very simple one that could likely be summed up in a paragraph, dispelling all of the mystery immediately. However, mystery is fun, and so it's something I'd like to hang on to for a bit in this video. While we hold on to this mystery and before we connect all of the dots, I'd like to first expose you to the setting and some of the individual chapter stories Sanitarium has to offer. This way you'll have a real taste of what this game is actually like, and how much bleak morbidity and disturbing content this cult classic has to offer. The first thing you need to understand, however, is that our main character, Max, is a patient in the titular sanitarium. Between chapters, Max is often returned to said sanitarium before being whisked off on yet another fantastical adventure. The first time Max is taken away, he is done so by a stone statue of an angel seemingly brought to life. This angel flies Max to the small town of Genet, which is the first story I want to show you today. So grab your popcorn, turn out the lights, and let's take a trip into the dark and mortifying horror of Genet.
Hey, you big dope! Get out of our life!
Come on, Billy. Let's play. You're not supposed to.
Okay.
As Max lands in Genet, he finds the town inhabited by nothing but children. However, these children are all horribly scarred and deformed. Some appear to have plant life growing out of them. One has 2 mouths. Another had both legs amputated and replaced with peg legs. It is a sad and grotesque place to be. The town itself is overrun with vines that block the only way out of this would-be quaint village. Many of the buildings are dilapidated or boarded up, wrecked cars half submerged at the water's edge, and the town square's fountain, which sits beside town hall and the local church, appears to have not been cared for in a very long time. The children offer little in the way of help for any of the many questions Max has to ask, and so it's up to Max to find his way out of town and learn as much about this bizarre place as he can along the way. A task he ultimately pulls off by gathering context clues from the children, more or less reading between the lines with them, reading reports in old newspapers and other such local documents. However, most of the clues he finds are not found in chronological order, leaving us the player, or in this case myself, the narrator of this video, to put it all together. Genet is ultimately a town whose story is made by its small population of residents, and to fully understand it we need to start by going back in time and looking at them and the zeitgeist of their neighborhood at the time it all went downhill. So let's turn back the clock a bit. Our first clue to the town's history comes in a document found in town hall. It tells of a new star being discovered above the town. The local preacher, Reverend O'Toole, refers to it as the eye of God that lights up the night sky. Taking the star as a good omen, the town moves forward with their plans for the annual pumpkin festival. In the diary of a young girl named Carol Driscoll, we get the next part of the story. Her father, Jetta Driscoll, is one of the key players in the town's pumpkin festival. As of late, he had been spending a lot of time tending to his pumpkin patch. Carol goes on to write of her father's alcoholism, and how he and her mother Marilyn get in heated arguments every night. Not too many entries later, Marilyn is dead. Genet tells his daughter that her mother simply had an accident and is gone to heaven now. Coinciding with this, his alcoholism becomes more rampant, and he turns his abuse on Carol now, verbally and physically. A death report later found in the local church indicates that Marilyn did not die of a simple accident, but was rather found dead in the bathtub with both of her wrists slit. Genet was questioned as a matter of procedure, but nothing had come of it. Whether Marilyn committed suicide unable to cope with her living conditions any longer, or whether Genet manipulated her body to make her death appear as a suicide is not known. At this time, the eye of God, as the town had come to know it, changes direction. Astronomers warn that this is not a star, but rather a comet, and its course is now dead set on Earth. Needless to say, the comet crashes straight into Genet, landing just on the outskirts of Jedda's pumpkin patch. Carol's next diary entry goes on to talk about how vines grew from the wreckage of the comet, overtaking the town and blocking the only way out. Father O'Toole, having been made interim mayor following the crash of the comet, forbade Genet from cutting the vines, as he still believed the comet to be a sign from God. Only now it was punishment for their abuse of the earth, a story many of the townsfolk unfortunately bought into in their post-disaster and isolation-driven hysteria. With his pumpkin patch and hard work gone to waste, Jedda's abuse of Carol increases. Carol writes of running out towards the barn to hide by the crashed comet and pray to her mother. This would ultimately be Carol's last diary entry. It's discovered in another paper that Genet was under investigation for child abuse. But in one of Sanitarium's most realistic moments, in stark contrast to what follows, the charges and investigation were dropped. Yet again, nothing had come of it. What remains of Carol now is a small grave in the local cemetery. This grave would later be dug up by Max, and a local child named Larry would come and take Carol's body on a red wagon. Larry was Carol's brother, and he loved her dearly. Following this, the sad tale of Genet takes a pretty drastic turn. As it would appear, the crashed comet was indeed carrying some form of powerful life. Not that of God exactly, but rather a sentient plant creature who took on the title of Mother after hearing it in Carol's prayers. This creature mistook itself for the children's mother and a godlike creature. Having witnessed the hysteria Father O'Toole drummed up in the days prior to and following the comet's crash, how he steered the townsfolk away from rational thought and into dangerous, irrational religious fear, and after having seen the sins Genet committed on his wife and daughter, sins which the whole town seemed convinced of but chose to ignore, Mother took it upon herself, having reached an advanced enough stage of development, to protect the children and their eternal souls. The first step would be to rid them of the harmful adults, or rather, all of the adults, as Mother views them all as evil. Whether she manipulated the children into doing it or found a way to do it herself is unknown, but it is evident enough that she managed to lure them all into the local school and have them murdered, as their bodies still remain there today. Mother's second step in protecting their soul is to rid the children of their human bodies. Through a series of experiments, she amputated the children's bodies, or otherwise changed them, in an attempt to make them more plant-like, with the goal ultimately being that one day their bodies would fuse with hers. When they are one, they would live forever, and their innocence be forever protected. Though this isn't something all of the children went along with willingly. They were forced to live by a strict set of rules. Only when Mother is resting do they dare go against them in any way. While Mother is awake, she has various means of enforcing the way of life she demands upon them. From controlling their bodies and taking over their ability to speak, further experimenting upon them, or sending them out to the pumpkin patch, where the crows mercilessly attack them, scarring their bodies, or for some, plucking their eyes from their sockets and leaving them blind. As Max discovers all this, he finds a way to run a power generator into the comet that crash landed and gave life to the foul beast, blasting it with enough electrical energy to explode its body and destroy the vines that kept the children trapped within. With Mother dead, the children's bodies slowly start to revert. The road leaving Genet becomes a white tunnel of light. Max grabs the hand of Maria, one of the children most affected by Mother, and enters the tunnel of light with her. In doing this, Max leaves Genet behind. Only, considering Genet more than anything is some strange reflection of Max himself, the world he's from, and the secrets he keeps locked inside, he's never truly leaving it behind. So that was the story of Genet. It's possibly one of the most depressing of Sanitarium's stories when you look at the small details, and perhaps even more so when you realize what some of the characters in this town are meant to represent to Max. And if you found that one strange at all, well, the next one I want to talk about isn't any more normal. Jumping ahead a few chapters in the story, I'd like to look at the Hive next. After having an anesthetic forcefully injected into him back at the asylum, Max drifts off once again to a world of morbid creativity. A world where his human form is shed, and we, the player, take on the role of Grimwall, a four-armed beast with horse legs, one eye, and a giant horn sticking out of his forehead.
A valuable lesson in scientific research, Max. In layman's terms, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
The Hive is easily one of Sanitarium's most unique areas. Not only is it set in the far distant future on a massive land suspended in the sky and created out of equal parts organic material and machine, but it's also inhabited in equal parts by insectoids and cyclopeans, the latter being the form Max's body currently takes. When Max awakes in the Hive as Grimwall, he has no memory of who he is, just as the true Max still does not. But he has some recollection of the state of things in this alien world. Those things being that cyclopeans are good and insects are bad. Max, or rather Grimwall, rips an ID marker from a nearby dead slug creature and gets himself access to the main portion of the Hive. Due to a very strange political history, the Hive is not just open for any one person to wander around it at will. And this is a history Grimwall struggles to learn as he makes his way around, talking to fellow cyclopeans and strange insect-machine hybrids. But to cut to the chase of it all, many years ago the Cyclopeans were at war against the insects. This war went on for years, until one day, through a series of holy visions, it was told to the Cyclopeans and the insects alike that there would be one final battle. The victor of said battle would then be given once and for all their rightful place as supreme being over the other. This is a victory the Cyclopeans won, with Grimwall being one of their greatest war heroes. Or so he was told by Gravin, a fellow Cyclopean working in the Hive. Gravin catches him up to date on what's been going on in the Hive, while a half-mechanical insectoid dissects a live baby, implanting cybernetics into it on a nearby table. Gravin goes on to tell Grimwall that following their victory in the war many years back, many Cyclopeans actually started to believe that it was all a hoax, that the war never happened and the insects never even existed. That is, until now. Recently, the Hive, the very one our protagonist finds himself in now, was discovered next to an ancient abandoned mechanical factory. The Cyclopean leader Gromna then sent a research team into the Hive to investigate it. The research team, however, was swiftly captured by the Insect Queen, who now holds the team prisoner with intent to kill them. That's when Gromna stepped in again and negotiated their release pending the signing of a peace treaty. Said peace treaty is set to get signed at the Hive on the eve of Retribution, i.e. very soon. Until then, the insect race and the Cyclopeans work together at the Hive to get things ready for the occasion. Suspicious of the current state of affairs, Grimwall decides to do some investigating. He gains entry into a local factory where inside he sees insectoids working a bellows and a strange electronic unit, while another creature above periodically dumps the bodies of dead Cyclopean children into the molten pit. Grimwall relays this information to Gravin, who finds the notion entirely unbelievable. He says Gromna would never allow such a thing, but then the insects inside also claimed their orders came directly from him. Grimwall leaves to get proof to back up his claims. He first gets his ID upgraded from the machine insectoid he's seen dissecting the baby. Then he heads into the nearby governmental lab where he uncovers even more shocking truths. Immediately beyond the doors, Grimwall meets Gritza, a half-Cyclopean, half-bug. Gritza, through hazy recollections, tells Grimwall of how Gromna betrayed the team to the Queen. The imprisoned researchers had actually become the subject of Gromna's experiments. He says Gromna is looking for the key to immortality, and the insects are the answer. Sadly, one of the side effects to Gromna's experiments is dementia. dementia, and Gritza has nothing left to divulge. Directly behind Gritza, baby Cyclopeans float, suspended in bottled green liquid attached to the organic matter of the Hive. Grimwall cuts one of them free and turns it over to Gravin as the proof he was looking for. Gravin and Grimwall next investigate Gromna's home. Following the clues they find in there, they investigate a large machine nearby. However, the machine is currently incomplete and inoperable. Grimwall inspects the government building deeper, looking for the needed parts. Deeper into the Hive, he finds more of the lost research team. Grundle, another hybrid, says his job is to feed the Cyclopean clone babies to keep them alive. In the next room, Grimwall finds Cyclopean children strung up to the wall, their blood being drained into the Hive, while machines and other Cyclopean hybrids keep them alive. A nearby hybrid named Grella tells of how Gromna is attempting to merge insect, Cyclopean, and machine as a way to achieve his immortality, an interesting parallel to Mother in Genet. Grimwall steals a piece of machinery from this room and returns to Gravin. The machine is half functioning at this stage and opens a portal with seemingly no destination. With more parts needed, Grimwall returns once again to the government building and makes his way to the innermost sanctums. Gromna can be seen giving a press conference announcing the dawn of a new age of superior creatures. Looming over him, the insect queen twitches wildly. Only this insect queen seems to be powered by an external source. Grimwall pulls the plug and the queen seems to die. Was this all a facade? A clever ploy by Gromna to convince everybody of a war or disparity that doesn't exist? The rest of the chapter unfolds in a bit of a blur. Grimwall returns to Gravin as quick as possible. With the final machine parts, they teleport out and inform the world immediately of what's really going on. Proper authorities intervene and the Hive is bombed into oblivion. Max awakes from the nightmare only to find himself in another as he crawls his way out of a morgue's body drawer. Though one of the strangest journeys Max goes on and hard to decipher with only what I've told you here, the parallels to Max's real life and the ongoing source of his trauma runs very deep. Between these two places alone, we've seen similar ideas repeating. The danger children are put in, and the high rates of mortality being the most obvious. But running alongside this, we also see an ongoing theme of those in positions of power, those meant to protect the children, being the ultimate cause of their suffering, even if in some twisted way the harm doer's logic doesn't believe this to be an act of evil. At best, they consider it salvation. At worst, it is cracking a few eggs to make an omelet. Perhaps a little less obvious, however, we also see the betrayal and punishment of much of the adult cast starting to repeat. The adults in Genet dragged out back, murdered, and hidden away. The adults, or rather the Cyclopean research team in the Hive, being subject to experiments and forced into hiding. But there's one more chapter I want to take a very brief look at before we start putting this together and suggesting ideas of who these people and creatures are, what they're meant to represent from the real world, and what exactly is going on to make Max's mind such a dark place. In one of Sanitarium's final chapters, Max awakes in an ancient Aztec village as an old god named Olmec. Upon arriving in the lost village, Max, as Olmec, is told by the town's oracle that Quetzalcoatl, one of the ancient gods the village used to pray and make sacrifices to, has returned to the village and began to attack it. With the town's most able men quickly disposed of, they turned the only direction they knew how to resurrect Olmec, another ancient warrior god, to do battle against him. So immediately we see the parallels again. Those in positions of power betraying the ones below them, the ones who would previously looked to them for guidance. As Olmec explores the village, he sees the ghosts of many fallen men and the rubble of destroyed buildings. In talking to the village chieftain, he finds a man distraught and totally resigned, believing his daughter to have been killed in the collapse of one of the buildings despite not pulling her body from the rubble. Olmec, however, investigates said building and finds his daughter inside, alive and well. He carries her out to the chieftain, who discovers, in a rare moment of optimism for the game, that perhaps there is hope after all, that a defeatist mentality will not do his village any good. This is perhaps somewhat undercut by one of the women of the village committing suicide immediately after, following her husband's sacrifice of himself to weaken Quetzalcoatl so Olmec can properly match him in power. But it is what it is. Though Olmec eventually discovers a way to defeat Quetzalcoatl using a death mask recovered from his tomb, the only thing I actually wanted to look at in this chapter was the saving of the chieftain's daughter. Though I'm sure there's more that can be dug into here, this is a pretty straightforward section of the game and doesn't involve too much of what I want to explore today. After this chapter ends, Max is immediately transported into a new nightmare that'll take him through to the final confrontation. So at this point, it's best we take a few steps back again, look at our main character Max, and try to make sense of some of how all of these things are connected, what the asylum actually is, and what's going on in the real world. In looking at our main character Max and trying to understand his state of mind, we really have to look at two different points in his life, two different moments which defined him. In looking into his past, we're able to further identify the state of reality and his place within it. Through this, we can also find the truth of the Sanitarium itself. Before we continue, however, I want to preface the rest of this video by saying a lot of this game is open to interpretation and requires the players to do some extra legwork filling in the holes by drawing from the abstract. If you've played this before and drawn your own conclusions, I do not want you to simply take mine or somebody else's. I also don't want you to feel your vision is being undermined in any way. What you all as individuals interpret from an experience, I would generally argue, is way more valuable than what you heard somebody else did or what a writer might have even intended. Games like this are best experienced and remembered by your personal interactions with it and your personal gains. And I don't want anybody to feel like that's being taken away from them. I'm just here to present the story as I seen it. Now, there will be no more breaks like this one left in the video. From here on out will be a constant stream of information that maybe goes all over the place from time to time before truly settling. With that said, let's continue with Max. Max, for all intents and purposes, has two beginnings. The one we're introduced to him with, and the real one. We'll start with the first and look at how Max is initially presented to us, and how the forces in his life obfuscate the truth not just from us the player, but from him as a character as well. When we first see Max, his face mostly hidden from the camera, he's getting in a car where he makes a phone call to his wife telling her he's found the answer, but that he has more information to tell her and he'll let her know when he gets home. He's very clearly excited about something. He turns on his music and steps on the gas. It's dark out, visibility is low, a storm is raging. The roads are dangerous and filled with twists and turns. It doesn't take long, but Max crashes the car through a guardrail and off the edge of a steep drop. It was after this he awakes in the asylum tower and gets carried away to the town of Genet, which, if you recall the crashed car on the water's edge there, it probably makes more sense now. After Max leaves Genet, he takes a stroll through the asylum's courtyard, talking to all of the orderlies. They all inform him that he is indeed a regular in the sanitarium. He had been told earlier by Dr. Morgan that he had actually tried to break out of the sanitarium a few days prior, that he had stolen a staff member's car and crashed it, resulting in damage severe enough that his entire face needed to be bandaged up. He insists that he's not crazy and doesn't belong there, but most of the doctors take his story of Genet to imply the exact opposite. After telling another orderly of the town, said orderly offers an explanation. Recently, a fire had rampaged through the asylum. Though Max was able to escape, many others were not so lucky. And so, feeling guilty about saving himself and leaving the other patients behind, the doctor theorizes that Max created the place and the characters in his mind as a way to cope with the event and perhaps feel as if he had helped them achieve peace in their deaths. This isn't quite accurate, but serves as a great red herring for the time being. A red herring Max realizes for what it is as his proper memories slowly come back to him. While in the courtyard, Max envisions a gargoyle statue come to life, offering him a wish. In a moment of clarity, Max speaks from the deepest recesses of his consciousness, and he voices his wish to see his sister once more. The gargoyle abides, transporting Max to what I'll refer to as his second beginning, the one that truly set his life on its course. When Max awakes, he finds himself in another strange location and another strange body. This is a place where we get most of our answers to understanding Max. Now inhabiting the body of his younger sister, the child Sarah, Max finds himself in an otherworldly yet somewhat familiar location on one of the most pivotal days that would go on to shape the rest of his life. Sarah is at the circus. However, the circus is on an island all by itself. Within the water, half-decayed bodies gently bob. In the distance, a mansion stands on another plot of land, seemingly the only building left to escape a recent flood. In talking to the remaining circus folks, Sarah learns the land had flooded some time ago due to a dam burst. All of the townsfolk knew that the dam needed maintenance, but they took it for granted, always putting it off, assuming it would continue to last regardless. Obviously, that didn't happen, and the state of things now, the destructive forces of Mother Nature bearing down upon them, is the cost for their arrogant neglect. Despite the state of things, however, Sarah tries to enjoy the circus for what she can, beating games and winning prizes. One such prize being a clown doll she develops an immediate attachment to. But contrasting all the attractions, goofy people, and fun colors, there is a morbidity in the air, a sense of impending doom that she simply cannot escape. Sarah learns from another circus folk that when this flood occurred, one of the circus freaks, a half-octopus man creature named Iggy, escaped his cage and got out into the open water. Since getting into a larger body of water, Iggy's body began to grow to match his new environment at a drastic rate. Anybody who tries to escape the island now is swiftly taken down by him, and at night, his long tentacles stretch over the land, poking and prodding for more bodies. At the rate he's growing, it's only a matter of time before he can reach so far inland that none of them will be safe anymore. If the nature of the flood doesn't kill the people on land, then the nature of the beast certainly will. Another man likens the situation to how he perceives a certain famous book about a man hunting a large sea creature, and states that the creature itself is not just a beast, but a representation of all that is evil in the world and needs to be destroyed. Thankfully, in this bizarre dreamscape, Max, as Sarah, does manage to defeat this image of evil incarnate. The confrontation takes place in a cave beneath the main island, and unblocks a passage leading Sarah into the house that avoided the flood. In other terms, it unlocks a room in Max's mind to help him come to better terms with his past. This home, as you might suspect, is that of Max and his family's, and is a place of great importance. As Sarah wanders around inside from room to room, she sees blue spectral images of her family. Max is there, her mother and father too, like ghosts. Only the truth is already plain at this point. These images are not ghosts, but rather Sarah is. Before Max arrived at the flooded circus, the gargoyle that granted his wish to see his sister done so first by feeding Max a memory of her. Max sits in his bedroom as a child, reading a Grimoire comic book. Grimoire, the icon of strength and an avatar for the strength Max would later need to find within himself as an adult. Child Max is summoned to go see Sarah in her bedroom. When he arrives in there, she's very, very ill. She asks Max if he can find her clown doll for her, the one that she won at the circus. Though Max looks everywhere he can think, he's unable to locate it, and time simply runs out. Sarah's body goes limp as she breathes her last breath, and Max is left with the trauma of having felt he failed his sister in her final hour. Sarah, in the mansion now, witnesses some of the aftermath of her death. The grief Max experienced and the guilt he felt for having not been able to find her clown doll for her. In Genet, we see an extension of Max's feelings for his sister in Larry and Carol. How after Carol's corpse was dug up, Larry would not let her leave his side, the dead sister constantly at his back, in a way holding him back. Thankfully for Max and Sarah, their parents were nothing like the Driscoll family, and were rather welcoming and supportive in contrast. Though it's never directly stated what Sarah died of, her parents lament her leaving the house without a coat one day, making it seem as though it could have been complications due to pneumonia. Further ahead in the aftermath, Max is showing a bit of a turnaround. He develops an interest in becoming a doctor, though the memory of his sister and his failure remains a constant feeling of guilt he's never taken the time to properly let go of. That is, until now. After defeating Iggy and unlocking this part of his past once again, Max and his image of Sarah work together to find her doll for her and finally move on from the memory that had been holding him back, transforming his memory of Sarah from something that had dragged him down and defeated him throughout the years into something that would only encourage him to do better going forward.
I thought I let you down when you needed me most.
No, don't think that. You could never let me down. You're my hero.
Hero?
You're trying to save all those kids. I know you can do it. I love you.
I love you too.
Sarah's death really was the beginning for Max. The beginning that defined where his life would go and how it would unfold. He would go on to do well in med school and later even marry. In med school, Max would befriend a man named Dr. Morgan. Dr. Morgan, as you'll recall, was the one who informed Max of his car crash, the memory loss that came with it, and the damage done to his face that resulted in the mask of bandages. Dr. Morgan was also a very smart man, unfortunately driven heavily by a controlling father who never seen his son as being good enough. One day in the real world, slowly at first and gaining traction with time, something began to change in the world at large. A mysterious disease started to spread across the globe called DNAV. This disease targeted exclusively newborns, deforming, crippling, and ultimately killing them as if a simple act of nature. Dr. Morgan and Max both began doing research for a cure, and though both of their directions were showing promise, Max found himself frequently running into new roadblocks, even traveling to investigate an ancient Aztec tomb where a legend existed of a tribe surviving something of this nature before and coming up empty. Eventually though, Dr. Morgan would come to show his manipulative side. Threatening his department's funding, he attempted to dissuade Max from continuing research for his cure. He would use Sarah's death to manipulate Max into thinking he wasn't doing his research with the right intentions, and that Max should instead focus on Dr. Morgan's treatment, the Hope Drug. It was only because of the Hope Drug that the Mercy Corporation even had money for funding to go around. The Hope Drug was showing a lot of promise, but was still failing in the test subjects. Though Max's funding was never cut, it does seem from this point forward that he did help Dr. Morgan in some capacity with his research. Max dove deep into his research, spending more and more time away from home. Eventually, the time away from home would start putting pressure on his marriage. Max, perhaps not wrongfully so, began suspecting his wife of having an affair, as she was very vocal about her disappointment with the way things were going. But Max simply could not stop the research. The longer testing went on, however, the more Dr. Morgan started to show his true colors, running experiments on animals that seemed little more than just torture to Max, going on crazy rants about his ambitions and desires. It was very clear Morgan was no longer interested in a cure, but rather in making a name for himself, something that perhaps his father would be proud of. In many ways, Dr. Morgan very clearly resembles the villains in Max's dreams, the easiest of which to relate him to being Gromna, the Cyclopean diplomat who sold out his researchers to the insectoids, in this case the virus, manipulated and corrupted the ones that he could, and held the world's children in suspension all the while, as if they were nothing but props to feed his own ego and reputation. And so Max, once again, with all the anxiety of children dying around the globe, a dead sister he could never bring back to life, and a marriage a little more than just on the rocks, returned to working on his own cure away from Dr. Morgan's watchful eyes. Though he hit one frustrating wall after another, the answer eventually came to him as he caught a glimpse of the photograph showing his visit to the Aztec tomb. Another moment in his life that served as a very pivotal experience, and another image his mind would later call upon to give him the courage he needed to do what must be done. With newfound gusto, he ran his new answer through the computer's checks and found it to be a success. From there, we've already seen how this story unfolds. He prints the solution to a DVD and takes off in his car, only to have it crash moments later. But this time, the truth is revealed. The crash was not an accident. The brake line was cut. Max wasn't a crazy person escaping an asylum in a stolen staff car. He was a researcher whose cure was being actively sabotaged by another doctor. Disappointed to find out that Max survived the crash, Dr. Morgan visits him in the hospital. He then tampers with Max's IV, injecting a strange drug into it that will kill him as soon as it hits his bloodstream. If Max couldn't wake from his coma now, this was the end. In order to do that, however, he needed to battle through the haze over his mind, overcome his doubts and fears, and gain the strength and confidence he needed to stand up for himself and wake from this nightmare a new man. As Max approached the end of his dream, he found Dr. Morgan there, a taunting black mass with long tentacles not unlike those of Iggy's, the octopus man in the flooded circus. The symbol of all man's evils focused to a singular point. Only Max now held and could wield the avatars of the strength, wisdom and courage he had long locked away inside of him. He also held the memory of his sister, who no longer made him doubt himself, but gave him a reason to believe. As he fought the doctor's black tentacles away, reaching for them wildly, in the real world, his body found something else that felt like an extension of that same evil creature. The IV containing Dr. Morgan's poison just moments from entering his bloodstream. With one mighty pull, the IV ripped from his arm. Max suddenly awakes in a hospital bed. Nurses come to check on him. Dr. Morgan is sneaking away around a corner, suspecting he had succeeded in murdering Max. However, he is later tracked down and put on trial for his horrible experiments and ongoing sabotage of others' research. Max's cure goes into mass production, and he and his wife later have a healthy child. All is well that ends well. But then that still leaves the question, was the Sanitarium even real? Well, this one is still very much up for debate, but I think it's safe to say that the asylum as we've seen it was definitely not entirely real, and the evidence of that begins very early. Inspecting the windows in the tower early on, the stained glass contains images of pumpkins. The stained glass in the courtyard holds the images of clowns. If any of it was real, then Max certainly was projecting something extra onto it, but that's not actually something I believe. While it's very much up to personal opinion, I believe everything outside of the car crash sequence, most of the flashbacks, and the finale were strictly mental. That the Sanitarium was nothing more than a psychological manifestation of all the parts of himself he needed to overcome to save himself, the children, and his marriage, and defeat the evils of the current world. Outside of this though, there's lots of neat oddities you can look into and consider more deeply for those who would like to. For starters, there's tons of interesting location parallels. The fountain in Genet, for instance, being located between Town Hall and the church. A similar fountain placement can be found in the asylum's courtyard, located between the doctor's office and the chapel. The car in Genet, of course, resembles the one Max crashed in. Also in Genet, there's this giant fish sign atop a small shop. There's also O'Toole's son fishing down at the water. In the courtyard, a patient who believes himself to be an old-timey sailor is completely inseparable with this large fish. Then we got this random guy in the flooded circus with a fishing pole for an arm. Though we never talked much about Max's wife, she does appear a couple times throughout the game in flashbacks, and another character at the flooded circus named Inferno seems to mirror her in many ways, even showing some of the stages of her alleged affair and lamenting of her husband's distance. Though we drew allusions earlier between Max and Sarah to Larry and Carol, it also stuck out that the Driscoll parents were nothing like Max and Sarah's. But if you really want to stretch it, Jetta spending all his time out in the pumpkin patch and neglecting his family could also be related to Max spending all of his time in the lab, destroying his marriage in the process. Though if that was the case, they definitely took it to an extreme that makes it feel a little bit unlikely. Mother back in Genet always poses an interesting question to me as well. That question being, what exactly is she? Or rather, what is she meant to represent? While I don't think she's really meant to represent any one thing specifically, like a lot of the things Max sees in his journey, things can be an amalgamation of ideas overlapping onto characters. In part, I think Mother does represent Dr. Morgan, but more than that, as an alien invader taking on a plant form, I think she also represents DNAV, how the virus seemingly appeared out of the blue one day, as if an act of nature, and started infecting newborns and children. Though her motive was to save the children, it is very clear what that type of salvation and preservation of innocence ultimately entailed. This isn't the only time we see acts of nature presented as antagonists either. In the flooded circus, the breaking of the dam and Iggy are presented as Mother Nature's response to man's arrogance, which might just be how Max feels about DNAV in general. Moving on from that though, earlier in the video I stated that there was dialogue that seemed to imply Sarah may have died of pneumonia, or at least complications from it. But that is definitely a guess on my part. At one point, Sarah's mother can be seen stating that the sweater she was knitting would have kept Sarah warm at the circus. This to me could either imply that Sarah went to the circus and got sick as she did not have a coat, or that Sarah unfortunately passed away before she could go. If the latter is true, then Max would have imagined her at the circus as a way to have her finally go in death where she never could in life. The doll then that Max was looking for could have been any doll. You may also be wondering why I spent so little time on the Aztec village chapter, and well, That's because that part of the game is just kind of boring and doesn't have that much important to look at. This is also the one part that I looked into other people's explanations, as I really wasn't getting much of anything for this. The chapter largely just seems to exist to show in some abstract fashion how Max in the real world regained his confidence and found a way to save the children. Like the whole thing is just an exploration of him doing his research or something. I will say though that the chieftain here seems a much better candidate as an avatar of Max than Olmec himself does. This chapter, however, does introduce something odd and kind of fun in a meta way to the narrative. Since we never truly understand how Max solves DNAV, it is rather funny that Olmec, an Aztec god, comes in to save the day and save the children for Max as a literal deus ex machina, a god from the machine. Kind of funny too that Olmec talks and acts like a computer, the most important tool Max had in solving DNAV.
This one appears to have died very young.
Literally a god from the machine. Really, this is a game I could play 100 times and keep turning new stones in, and would love to keep doing so. But the more I turn them, the more I feel I need to flip already turned stones another way. Though the surface level plot is very simple, the lore and connections waiting to be uncovered in these hellish dreamscapes encourages me to look deeper every time I play it. And I don't think I'll ever truly settle my understanding of this game's various intricacies. And hell, next time I play it, I might think I got it entirely wrong today. But that's also part of the beauty of this experience. All that said though, this is a game I would cautiously recommend to people. It's not for everybody. It is dated, movement speed is a snail's pace, there are soft locks that will require old saves to progress past, and I did suffer a number of crashes that made beating it take much longer than normal. It's worth it every time, of course, but these struggles are very frustrating. And with operating systems getting further and further ahead, I feel stability for this old title may be getting worse and worse. At least with the Steam version, where it is a standalone executable. On GOG, where it launches through DOSBox, that might not be the case. But some of the bugs in this game have been there for 23 years now and aren't likely going away anytime soon. But yeah, that's all I'm going to say on Sanitarium. Not that I wouldn't love to consider it even more. If you can get into the mind space and don't mind slow-paced games with abstract worlds that endlessly engage your morbid curiosity, then do yourself the favor. Travel back to 1998, where Sanitarium is waiting for you to discover your own meaning within the maelstrom of a tortured mind.
Sanitarium.